All right, let us start with the SBR March June 2005 examiners report. Well, before the exam, this is the most important thing you must watch at least once before the exam so that you can find out what previous candidates made the mistakes, or if you are repeating the SBR exam and you were unable to pass this exam, so what mistakes might be made which caused you the paper, so that you won't repeat those mistakes in the future. So let us start with it. Let us dive into the examiner report. Firstly, we just have the journal comments over here, and then we are starting with the first question, right? And we had the question number one of eGap company. As you can see, this question included a pre-populated spreadsheet response, presented draft extracts from a consolidated statement of financial position, as you can see. Okay, two exhibits describe circumstances related to a step acquisition of a subsidiary. So it was a step acquisition question and a defined benefit plan of the reporting entity. So step acquisition and IS 19. Using exhibit 1, explain with calculations and in accordance with the IFRS accounting standards, that is how to correct the accounting treatment of the investments in Brian in the consolidated financial statements for the year ended 31st December 2007. Your answer should include a revised calculation of the goodwill arising on the acquisition of Brian. Okay, so part A was generally examiner saying that was well answered. Okay, with many candidates showing a good knowledge of IS 28 in investment in associates and joint venture IFRS 3, joint venture and IFRS 3 business combinations. The scenario describes how the parent eGap acquired a 25% shareholding in Brian at the start of the reporting year, exercising a significant influence. It was then acquired a further 45% shareholding at the end of the year. A working for goodwill was provided which contained errors. Considerations via share exchange had not been accounted for, and non-controlling interest was measured at its proportion of the fair value of the subsidiary identifiable net assets, where the policy was to measure NCI, non-controlling interest, at fair value. Okay, so firstly, examiners saying that good answers explain the treatment for the year as an associate, and then secondly explain the treatment at the end as a subsidiary. Candidates who did this gain a healthy number of marks for a part A. Some candidates failed to address the treatment of initial 25% investment. Oh god, seriously? Candidates should avoid the temptation to jump straight into the year end position, as their answer will miss a key part of the requirement, and surely if you miss that, you might have lose at least you know you might have to lose at least 3 to 4 easy marks. Okay, now the explanation of the initial investment should not have been limited to the treatment in the consolidated statement of financial position. Requirements stated in the consolidated financial statements for the year ended 31st December 2007, which indicates that explanation should include treatment in the consolidated statement of profit or loss. Exhibit 1 describes how the initial made well prepared candidates explain that given significant influence was the exercise, the correct treatment was to apply the equity method. Marks were available for describing equity method. That was the free marks, guys. That was the free marks. So identifying eGap share of post acquisition profit in the year and calculating the carrying amount of the investment as at 31st December 2007. Exhibit clearly stated that control was obtained on 31st December X7, so there were no marks for explanations relating to control, okay, other than how this impacted the accounting treatment on that date. Similarly, a description of the line by line consolidated process in the consolidated statement of financial position was not needed, as the exhibit specifically stated that Brian was treated as a subsidiary and accounted for using the acquisition method. So mostly candidates were able to explain the process of the step acquisition on 31st December X7 and the need to measure the previous shareholding to fair value. In many cases, candidates gain relatively easy marks by this. So what you have to state for this, if you were unable to answer this, the stating IFRS 3 requirement that all consideration should be at fair value, calculating the fair value of the share issued using the share value provided in Exhibit 1, calculate the subsequent gain on remeasurement. So some candidates struggle with calculating the fair value of NCI when giving the subsidiary fair value per share. Well, that was very easy. Okay, well prepared candidates should find this a relatively simple calculation at professional level. Surprisingly, fewer answers explain the double entry for this transaction. Seriously guys, this is very simple, so the exhibit stating no accounting entries have been recognized in respect of this issue of EGAP's equity shares. That means you guys have lose easy 4 to 5 marks, 2 to 3 marks, right? So marks were available for highlighting outline the accounting treatment. Why didn't you do that? Making a note of this would also help answering part C. So that means you in connecting with the requirement C, you lose 4 to 5 marks. Restated goodwill calculation. Now on final correction relating to goodwill calculation was to adopt EGAP group policy of the measuring the NCI at acquisition at its fair value, similarly to the share issue. However, the dual effect of the correction was often omitted from candidates' answer, which had a knock-on effect when candidate move on to part C. A restated goodwill calculation was often well presented and included corrections for their fair value of the original 25% holding, the fair value of the share consideration and the fair value of NCI. Other candidates were able to score well in this part of the question provided that they met the requirement to explain the accounting treatment of both investments in the step acquisition. Some answers were quite lengthy, indicating candidates were spending more than the allotted time on question 1 in part A of this question. So 10 marks equates to just under 20 minutes including reading time. Then we had question, exhibit 2, 8 marks available for it. Explain with calculation and in accordance with IAS 19 employee benefits how to account for the defined benefit plan in consolidated financial statement for the year ended 31st December X7. So assess candidates and understanding of IAS 19 employee benefits. Candidates need to explain the accounting treatment relating to a defined benefit plan which was amended to provide additional benefits during the year. No entries had been made other than to recognize cash contribution paid into the pension plan at the end of the year as an expense in consolidated statement of profit or loss. So candidates who were familiar with the reporting requirements under IAS 19 scored very well in this part of the questions. Answers which followed a methodological procedure were able to pick up significantly marks by explaining the process alongside the calculations that outline the related charges to profit or loss or other comprehensive income. Most answers showed good basic knowledge of the double entries relating to service, interest, although some incorrectly accounted for the remeasurement gain within profit or loss rather than other comprehensive income. Very few answers explain that this would not be reclassifying profit or loss in the future. So what examiner is saying further? C is saying at this level, candidates should be expected to apply their knowledge to more advanced scenarios. While most candidates knew that interest and services costs should be split before, after amendment and calculation for service costs were generally well answered, less well prepared candidates failed to apply the revised rate or base the interest cost on the appropriate obligation. A significant number of weaker answers lacked appropriate application skills and instead explained how to define benefit and define contribution plans deferred. This information was not relevant and so earned no marks. Most likely cause subsequent time allocation pressure as well. So be careful while planning, guys. Then we have third requirement of the question. Using exhibit 1 and 2, your previous answer adjusts the pre-populated spreadsheet response option to correct the draft consolidation statement of financial position as at 31st December X7. So this in this part C continues to be a challenge to some candidate despite advice provided in previous examiners reports. Candidates should be prepared to amend extracts from draft financial statements, in this case statement of financial position, the consolidated one, based on their answers to part A and B, as part C is heavily reliant on answers to earlier parts. Candidates should be considering their answers to part C as they work through part A and B. In short, part C is not stand alone. Candidates should take some time to read through the whole question and make brief planning notes on the implication of each piece of information. So some candidates might prefer to answer C alongside their answers to A and B if good answer to A and B ends with a summary of the required corrections, example correcting journals, that candidates may find that the process of correcting in part C is made easier. Each correcting step is already laid out and ready to be made. However, where performance is low in A and B, this tends to impact performance in C. So be careful, guys, for the next time, that when you are done good with the section A or B, try to be good in section A and B, as requirement A and B more often connected with requirement C. Be careful with it. So good answer. Correcting columns to the right of the draft C consolidated SOFP. The number of columns depends on the extent to which the adjustments in earlier parts are explained and segmented. Where this is done in an appropriate order, candidates are more likely to gain marks. Using one column for each adjustment helps the marker to follow the process. On the other hand, using formula to amalgamate a collection of corrections is less clear and risk errors, and it is therefore not advisable to use formulae within cells. The correction process should make each step of the correction easy. So follow without the need for markers to have to check formula. This would align with what is expected of an accountant in practice to provide a clear audit trail of your workings. Attempts for part C were varied. While it is encouraging to see more answers, use the recommended approach outlined above. A significant number of answers included single entry corrections, which would limit opportunities for marks. Some answers were poorly referenced and made it hard to follow through any workings. A common mistake was to decrease share capital relating to share exchange rather than increasing it. Few answers split the issue between share capital and other components of equity. So significant number of attempts entered the goodwill amount is full as calculated in part A rather than including the corrections that are needed to get to correct goodwill amount. Weaker attempts seem to think that amounts for goodwill and NCI shown in the consolidated SOFP related wholly to Brine, and so remove these amounts in full and replace with their answers to part A. Exhibit 1 shows a draft goodwill figure for Brine, which is not the same as the total goodwill in draft consolidated statement of financial position. So this should be clear that the total goodwill relates to more than one subsidiary. Okay, so answers tend to focus on the correcting relating to the investment and overlook adjustments to the pension plan, possibly indicating a lack of preparation in relation to non-group issues. Now the question number 2, C, saying required candidates to consider both reporting and ethical implications of specific events in contemporary scenario. This question had two parts of it, each relating to the two segment separate exhibits. So in accordance with IFRS 9, discuss the accounting treatment of the transaction in exhibit 1 in the financial statement of by float for the year ended 31st December X7. Exhibit 1 described how by float had invested in 5% of the equity share capital of another entity some years ago, for which it did not make an irrecoverable election to measure fair value operating losses, and by float has provided a large loan under normal commercial terms, which at the start of the reporting period had been correctly measured at amortized cost 3 months before the end of the reporting period. By float agreed to write off half the loan in exchange for a further 10% of the equity share, whose fair value was considerably lower than the carrying amount of the loan receivables. By the end of the reporting period, the entity was unable to repay the interest due on the loan. Now, a good answer to part A would have comprised three aspects as follows. IFRS 9 requires an equity investments to be measured at fair value through profit or loss if the reporting entity has not elected to present changes in value, other comprehensive income. In this case, no election had been made, so the former treatment was required. This is quite basic knowledge of the standard, which should be known by the well prepared candidates at this level. Indeed, many answers picked up on the fact that the election had not been made, so leading to only possible remaining treatment with fair value through profit or loss. Weaker answer stated that the need to recognize at fair value without explaining the other side of the entry. Loan exchange for 10% more shares when by float agreed to write off half of the loan in exchange a further 10% of the equity shares. Half of the loan should have been de-recognized and replaced by the 10% equity investment, which is initially measured at fair value under IFRS 9. The exhibit explained how the fair value of the equity shares was considerably lower than the carrying amount of the loan de-recognized. So, resulting from loss must be reported in statement of profit or loss. Many answers identified loss would arise as a result of the exchange for shares, although fewer discussed the need to de-recognize the loan. Loan receivables and loss allowance. A loan should be measured at amortized cost using the effective interest rate, with interest recognized in profit or loss. Allowance for expected credit losses equal to 12-month expected credit losses should have been recognized when the loan was initially recognized. By the end of the year, the default on the interest payments indicated a credit impaired loan, and expected to credit losses should now be measured at lifetime expected credit losses. Answers to this part was varied. The the least well prepared candidates avoided it completely, while some commented on the need for provision for bad debts or even incorrectly referenced IS 37. Candidates appear to lack sufficient knowledge of the impairment principles outlined in IFRS 9, despite it being a regularly examined issue at this level. Other answers identified the need for impairment, but few discussed the expected credit loss model in the sufficient detail. Then Exhibit B discussed the ethical issues raised by the scenario and the actions that Ms. Hayes should take to resolve this. So the discussion of the ethical issues was often well answered by the candidates, who are generally well prepared to discuss threats to fundamental ethical principles. Candidates should not expect to earn marks by merely presenting a summary of the code's ethical principle and threats. Candidates must apply their knowledge to the circumstances described in the exhibit. In most questions, candidates are asked to also recommend actions to resolve the ethical issues that they have identified, as was the case here. As in previous sittings, weaker answers repeat information from the exhibit without any additional commentary or ethical perspective. Answers that simply describe issue as unethical without explaining how, why, also failed to earn marks. Unfortunately, and despite repeated advice to avoid doing so, weak attempts include significant chunks of the exhibit cut and pasted into the answer. This will earn 0 marks. No marks. Okay. Candidates should consider drafting a short plan when answering this section to avoid an unstructured and poorly presented list of unethical principles with little or no reference to the scenario. Concise answers that focus on each issue identified from the scenario and explain the ethical issues breached can score well relatively quickly. Many answers identified specific ethical threats and described the courses of action to attempt to resolve this. However, few answers fully considered the need for a going concern assessment and the need to assess the ability to continue trading for 12 months from the reporting date. Accountant has a duty to perform this review, after which, if going concern uncertainties exist, the potential consequences such as disclosure of material uncertainties need to be discussed with the financial director and board. Some answers fail to adequately describe appropriate actions to resolve the ethical issues identified, which limited the scope for marks. Action should be specific to the scenario. For example, accountant should refuse to submit the optimistic analysis to the bank and instead revise to a more realistic basis. More typical actions include attempting to discuss and clarify the matter with the financial director in an attempt to resolve the issue before going further. So this scenario described a board that comprised ex-professional football players who the accountant felt did not respect her opinion. This suggested that the accountant might find it hard to raise the issue internally with the board, although she could seek out non-executive directors if there are any before seeking advice externally. Question 3. Men's company examines candidates' knowledge and application of a range of IFRS accounting standards. Okay. As would be expected, the particular IAS examined varies from setting to setting. It is worth highlighting from the outset of this report that question 3 is often the worst performing question across the whole paper. While some good answers are received, many candidates lack the knowledge and application skills to score satisfactory marks. A reasonable conclusion is that some candidates are not adequately prepared for the exam. Candidates are reminded that the need to study the whole of the SBR syllabus. Why are doing cherry picking or selected studies, folks? Also, the highlighted earlier in this report, too many candidates spend a disproportionate amount of time both studying for and answering question 1 and 2. Lack of exam planning. This is the reason, guys. You should have done planning. So this has an impact on question 3 and 4, which generally scores lower marks. In this specific questions, candidates were examined of IFRS 15, IFRS 16, IFRS 5, and discontinued operations, IFRS 9 again, and IAS 21, the effects of changes in foreign exchange rates. These are the easy standards, folks. What are you doing, folks? So using exhibit 1, in accordance with IFRS 15, contract with customer, discuss the accounting implications of the 2 contract modifications over the contract term. Part A of the question outlined details of 2 contracts with customers to provide information technology services over a 4-year period. Candidates were told that when agreed, each contract contained a single performance obligation. Both contracts had been modified during the contract period. This was the worst performing part of this question. Seriously. So the main issue appeared to be a lack of relevant knowledge. This is the regular standard and you guys are not well prepared on it. Okay. On a very small number of candidates even mentioned the basic definitions around contract modifications or key concepts around distinct goods or services. Even IFRS 15 is available on my YouTube channel for free. Not seriously. A large proportions answers simply presented basic and irrelevant knowledge on IFRS 15, such as 5 steps of revenue recognition model. This is a common feature of SBR exam, with candidates writing everything they know about a standard rather than relevant knowledge for the scenario and requirement. So from the 2 contract scenarios presented, contract 2 was better answered than contract 1. Stronger candidates were able to make their first attempt at this, fair attempt at this, and comment on things like spreading revenue recognition from the new contract over the remaining 3-year period. Now in exhibit 2, in accordance with IFRS 16, explain how to account for the lease agreement in financial statement for the year ended 31st December. X7 again 8 marks. Part B of the question provided candidates with the information about a lease on a head office that was extended partway through the original lease term. Candidates need to explain how to account for the original lease and impact of the lease extension. This was the best performing part of the question. Good. With many candidates scoring high or even full marks. Wow! This was because they provided clear discussion and numerical illustration of the initial accounting for the leases and the effect of the challenge in lease term and effect in interest rate. So, what was a common problem in the weaker answer is that lack of understanding of the basic lease accounting. This was disappointing given that leases are studied in earlier levels of ACC qualification. Seriously, guys, basic errors including applying the interest rate to the lease payment amount and liability or stating that the lease payments would be charged to profit loss. In part A, some weaker answers included significant amounts of rote learned but irrelevant knowledge such as definition of financial lease. Several candidates wasted time recalculating the initial present value of lease payments, ignoring or misunderstanding the fact that this had been provided to them. Again, we have now Exhibit 3. Using Exhibit 3 in accordance with IFRS accounting standard, explain with calculation how the bond should be accounted for in the financial statement for the year ended 31st December. So part C of this question given information about the purchase of bond which was denominated in a currency different to the functional currency, with candidates needing to explain with calculations the accounting treatment. It was good to see some very strong answers here demonstrating a good understanding of both the initial treatment of bond and the translation of the foreign currency. Unfortunately, there were also many weak answers, so this was a mixed question though. Disappointingly, several candidates treated the bond as a liability rather than as an asset, despite it being clear that this was a bond purchase. This suggests some candidates don't stop and think about the transaction they are presented with, making incorrect assumption as soon as they see words like bond or loan. Another feature of weak answer was for candidates to asset that no interest would be recognized until the premium was paid, again showing a lack of knowledge of a topic studied at earlier levels of ACC qualification. So basic amortized calculations were done well. Several candidates struggled to add the foreign currency aspect into their workings. Another common error was to state the exchange difference would take into the other comprehensive income rather than statement of profit or loss. Wow. This question contained three scenarios testing core syllabus areas. It was pleasing to see some candidates seem to have a good knowledge and understanding of various areas of syllabus, were able to apply this, and in their answers, unfortunately, significant number are simply not prepared enough for question 3. To improve performance, candidates need to ensure they are studying the whole syllabus. Candidates must also stop wasting so much time on irrelevant discussion and knowledge dumping from the IFRSs. Question 4. Stating candidates' knowledge and application of a range of IFRSs and will usually involve a stakeholder or investor focus. This question examined IAS 38, IFRS 2, IFRS 8. The conceptual framework for the financial reporting also featured a better understanding of the conceptual framework would have to improve candidates' performance more generally across the SBR examination. So, using Exhibit 1, accordance with IFRS, explain how to account for the purchase of the trademark on 1st January X7. Discuss the issue to be considered when subsequently accounting for the trademark in the year ended 31st December X7. Right. Part A provided candidates with information about the purchase of a trademark. Candidates were asked to explain the accounting on the initial purchase and then issues to be considered with the subsequent accounting. Answers to this question were mixed. Okay. The purchase was a share-based payment. Disappointingly, very few students seem to notice that this transaction was within the scope of IFRS 2. Again, this full standard is for free on my YouTube channel, and you guys and therefore failed to correctly value the transaction. Well prepared candidates were aware of the need to recognize the credit and equity. However, explanations that this must be split between share capital and share premium was infrequent. Candidates far more comfortable at dealing with IS 38. The significant majority were to identify that the purchase trademark was an intangible asset, with many candidates discussing annual impairment reviews due to indefinite life and showing an understanding of what indefinite life means. However, many candidates wasting time by going on to describe the 35% reduction in the estimated future cash flow as an indication of impairment rather than factor to be considered when performing the impairment review as part of the value in use calculation. Many candidates did not appreciate that the reduced cash flow would continue indefinitely, and therefore they incorrectly concluded that trademark had a definite life and should be amortized annually. Oh ho ho. Briefly discuss usefulness of the state segment reporting requirements of IFRS 8 in helping investors to better understand the performance of entities. There is no need to refer to a specific exhibit to answer part B. 1. Performance on this question was again mixed. Very strong answers covered issues such as stewardship, risk, geographical segments. Well prepared candidates refer to the conceptual framework and give a balanced discussion of why investors would be operating segment disclosure both useful and not useful. Weaker answers were not balanced. They give examples of what was useful to investors but were often unable why operating segment information might not be useful, such as issues relating to over aggregation. The very weakest answers regurgitated the principles of IFRS 8 around reportable segments, 10% rule, 75% rules without any discussion of the usefulness of the resulting information to investors. These candidates did not answer the requirements, so did not score marks. So, rote learning, folks, will cost you a paper. And here is the proof. This is the proof. What's the proof? Rote learning. And not understanding of requirement will cause you a paper. Using Exhibit 2, discuss whether the divisions or operating units would be identified Rita's operating segment. Now let's see what here it is. For this element of the questions, candidates were given information about the divisional structure and were asked to identify the operating segments from this. This part was generally well answered, with many candidates identifying the characteristics of operating segment, applying this the specific scenario that they have a correct conclusion that operating units would be the operating segment based on the information. Similar to part B1, the weakest candidates were unable to apply IFRS 8 knowledge to the scenario and again gave answers which were not relevant to this requirement. For example, reportable segment rules 10 and 75% rather than focusing on the definition of an operating segment. B3, using the summarized financial information exhibit 3, explain with calculation which of the operating segments should be separately reported in Rita's operating segments. Disclosure note, 8 marks. So for this requirement, candidates were given summarized financial information, revenue, profit and loss for both divisions, operating units. Candidates asked which of the operating segments should be separately reported in the disclosure note. So many good answers were given by candidates who demonstrate a sound knowledge, understanding of IFRS 8. They were able to successfully apply their understanding to requirement and scenario. It was pleasing to see many candidates with thorough knowledge of the 10% and 75 rule who were also able to apply these rules appropriately with the scenario. Only the very best candidates were able to discuss the combined report, profit and loss with calculating percentage threshold based on profit and loss rather than profit only. Those did not score well seem to lack of knowledge of standard or have a poor exam technique. Surprising number did not attempt this part of the question. Some weak candidates seem to have a preconceived idea of what would be asked and provided analysis of ratios such as asset turnover, gross profit, operating profit without any prompting of this in the requirement. See, if an examiner didn't ask you about it, why you are doing so? Read the requirement carefully. I always said read the requirement before answering. So many candidates score full professional marks by giving clear answers which were applied to the scenario as opposed to generic or irrelevant comments. Overall, those candidates who were adequately prepared and answered the specific requirements scored well. So, what are the concluding comments by the examiner? See, read each requirement carefully. Provide an answer to that requirement rather than requirement which candidates may have hoped they were presented with. Think about the verbs used in the requirement. For example, discuss required candidates to give a balanced answer which demonstrate advantages and disadvantages, positives or negatives, or different arguments and possibilities. Improve exam technique in spreadsheet requirement in question 1. Improve time management to improve performance in question 3 and 4. Study the full syllabus. Understand the conceptual framework, which is a useful reference when answering many of the exam requirements, which will also help candidates to better understand the principle outlined in the examinable IFRSs, accounting standards. So, folks, this is the examiner report. If I concluded, it the conclusion of the examiner. I did give you right now. If you have any questions, you can ask me on my WhatsApp. Sorry, yeah, this is it. 0302177706. This is my WhatsApp. I hope this video will help you in the upcoming examinations, but and you won't repeat those mistakes.